I'm Kylie Christian, President of Interpretation Australia, and I'm really glad to welcome you to the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation's webinar series. We love being part of it, and we hope you love it too.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. My name is Nick, and I am the chair of the Interpretation Network of New Zealand. We are a network designed to bring together interpretation professionals and showcase the best practice happening around our beautiful country of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Please enjoy this webinar from our international colleagues in the Global Alliance of Heritage Interpretation. Kia ora.
Hello, I'm Helena Vicic, and I'm representing Interpret Europe, a European Association for Heritage Interpretation. We're very excited about this opportunity of sharing excellence across the world. We're digging up knowledge here in Europe that can have a potential to inspire colleagues from other continents. And vice versa, the inspiration in the Global Alliance is guaranteed to come back. Global Alliance of Heritage Interpretation with the webinar series is a treasure box of inspiration and good practice that promotes high standards of heritage interpretation globally.
Hi there, I am Paul Caputo, Executive Director for the National Association for Interpretation. We serve 6,000 heritage interpreters in the United States. We are thrilled to be one of the organizing partners of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation year-long free webinar series. Enjoy.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Chuck Lennox again with the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. I want to welcome you to our third webinar this year in our series Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation, today hosted by Interpret Europe. Today's webinar is Interpretive Planning at World Heritage Sites, Experiences from Europe. Please put your questions you might have during the talk for our speakers in the question box, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the talk. Let me pass the screen over to my colleague Peter from Interpret Europe to introduce our speaker. Thanks for being with us this morning and afternoon and evening.
Thank you, Chuck. Yes, it's afternoon here, and welcome to everybody, and welcome to our panelists for this webinar. In 2019, at the Interpret Europe conference in Sarajevo, Matteo Rosati from UNESCO and Valia Sturgiotti from Interpret Europe began a conversation which was about how UNESCO's approaches to learning can help to develop heritage interpretation, and how heritage interpretation can help support learning at UNESCO-designated sites. Now, what came out of that conversation was a training program on interpretive planning at World Heritage Sites. The program focused particularly on understanding universal values of sites, their natural and cultural values, and on the human values that UNESCO stands for. That program was developed and then it is being delivered. And so far, planners and managers at 42 World Heritage Sites in Europe have been trained. And the purpose of this webinar is to share some of the experiences of the makers of the program and also of a couple of the participants from that training program. So our panelists today are the two developers of the program, and that's Matteo Rosati from Italy, and he is from the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Europe. He is the Program Officer, Culture and Intersectoral. And Valia Stegiotti from Greece, who is head of training at Interpret Europe. And the two participants are Daphne Sant Caruana from Malta, and she's from Heritage Malta, and the Giantia Archaeological Park World Heritage Site, where she is principal curator. And Yoli Mitrayogi from the National Institute of Cultural Heritage in Albania, where she is the head of the Department of Ancient and Medieval Architecture. Welcome to you all, and huge apologies for inevitably pronouncing your names horribly wrong. I'll be asking each set of questions, and we welcome the participants to put their questions also in the question and answer box in Zoom. Okay, I'll start with Matteo. Matteo, can you show us? Yeah, there you are. Thank you. Welcome. Matteo, can I ask you, first of all, to briefly describe the objectives of UNESCO designated sites, and that's including World Heritage Properties, Biosphere Reserves, and global geoparks.
Thank you, Peter, and hello to everybody, to all the participants, wherever you are, and my best greetings from Venice, Italy.
Oh, fantastic! Yes,
not bad.
We were there with you.
Not bad. So the UNESCO designated sites, there are many. World Heritage is definitely the most renowned, but there are many different designations, and these various designations respond to different conventions, as in the case of World Heritage, or programs that have their own specificities, their own specific objectives and processes. However, despite, or one may even say in reason of these specificities, they all should contribute to UNESCO's mission, which is to construct the defenses of peace in the minds, as in the preamble of our Constitution, and to foster sustainable development, which is currently intended in the framework of the Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this unique network of networks includes about 2,000 inscriptions all over the world, which are at risk from global challenges. And I think there's no need to repeat here what are the global challenges of our times. But they also can and should contribute to generating solutions and to sharing them by working with multiple stakeholders, by putting in place inclusive management systems, and by upholding the common UNESCO and UN values, also through education in formal and non-formal settings. So we believe that UNESCO designated sites have the potential, and to some extent they have the duty and the commitment to become sites for sustainable development, approaching the protection of culture and natural heritage as a driver for deeper and transformative changes for people and the planet.
Now, thank you. Now, there's an emphasis at the European Union level on heritage and culture contributing to more resilient, inclusive, and greener societies. Can you tell us how you feel heritage interpretation can help meet these great expectations?
Indeed. Well, let me start saying that UNESCO and the European Union are close allies, and they work together to advance the Sustainable Development Agenda at global level. And this special alliance, which has already originated a variety of activities in all of UNESCO's fields of expertise, is founded on our common values and commitments, and has seen the EU becoming not only the largest funding partner to UNESCO, but also a strategic global partner in terms of innovation and agenda setting. Now, coming to heritage interpretation, I feel like today I'm preaching to the choir, as you know much better than me that heritage interpretation is becoming increasingly relevant to highlight the cross-cutting contribution that heritage can make to society, and to develop more inclusive and dynamic approaches to how heritage values are defined in the first place and communicated. So for these reasons, as the UNESCO Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Europe, we have established cooperation with Interpret Europe already a few years ago to develop and pilot what we have defined as a values-driven approach to heritage interpretation, reflecting on how interpretive planning and services can serve both to increase the appreciation of heritage in designated sites and to communicate and uphold the values that are at the core of UNESCO's mandate and mission, such as inclusion and sustainability. So through heritage interpretation, both communities and visitors can gain a sense of higher responsibility, solidarity, respect for the others and for the diversity of our cultural and natural values, as well as a more mindful understanding of the sustainable interaction between humans and nature. In addition, heritage interpretation has the potential to open heritage management systems to more participatory approaches, making them more inclusive, more representative, and more people-centered. But again, I'm quite certain that you know all this much better than me already, so I think I can stop here for the moment.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, there's, I feel that what heritage interpretation can do is change people, and change people in many ways, and particularly change their attitudes and their behaviors. And I'm sure that would be very much at your heart as well.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, we want to develop tools and methodologies that can transform the experience of UNESCO sites into a more meaningful experience and have an impact on sustainable consumption and production patterns, for example, can have an impact on our critical approach to what we do starting in our households, not only when we visit sites, but again, appreciating heritage also means understanding the interaction between heritage and sustainability, between the global challenges and heritage, how heritage, for example, reacts to climate change and vice versa. And we do believe that heritage interpretation can really contribute to a great extent to achieve this kind of objectives.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Can I ask you then about the program that you developed with Interpret Europe, the Interpretive Planning program? Can you tell us a little bit about it, in particular, why you wanted to do it, what you felt were your desired goals and outcomes from a UNESCO perspective?
Okay, I'll try to do so.
Sorry, that's a big question. I quite understand.
Yeah, let's say I'll tell you a bit of our common story with Interpret Europe, how it started, and our partnership started in 2019 when we invited Interpret Europe to contribute to a regional workshop on the role of visitor centers at UNESCO-designated sites. And on that occasion, Interpret Europe presented and moderated a specific session on how heritage interpretation can serve the purposes of UNESCO's designations through a greater alignment with UNESCO's programs on education for sustainable development and global citizenship education, which are two programs developed within the education sector of UNESCO, and that we felt are very much relevant in this quest to use interpretation to improve the direct experience of UNESCO sites. So that experience was inspirational to develop a more structured and training-oriented approach, starting with a focus on World Heritage sites for two main reasons. On the one hand, communication and communities in the sense of a stronger engagement of local actors are two strategic priorities of the World Heritage Convention, to which we believe heritage interpretation can greatly contribute. On the other, no structured approach to heritage interpretation had been developed yet that is tailored to the specificities of the most important network of heritage sites at global level, which is the World Heritage List. So moving from these assumptions, UNESCO and Interpret Europe joined forces to launch a pilot regional course on interpretive planning in World Heritage Sites in Europe that was named WH-Interp, which combined Interpret Europe's technical expertise and training modalities with UNESCO's functions at the service of the World Heritage System. And the WH-Interp course was primarily aimed at staff from World Heritage Site, so-called managing authorities, in order to develop their knowledge and skills on participatory interpretive planning with a values-driven approach aligned, as I was saying, with UNESCO's mission, so as to eventually improve heritage management systems through the integration of heritage interpretation into the management systems and practices. And the course blended online and in-presence activities that combined lectures, site visits, group and individual activities online and in presence, written assignments, one-to-one technical assistance for the final drafting of interpretive planning outlines for the participants' own sites. So as you mentioned, the course had been organized in 2021 and 2022. We had 2 courses already delivered, including in-presence workshops in Kotor, Montenegro in 2021, and in Ljubljana, Slovenia last year, using local World Heritage Sites as real case scenarios. We have so far involved directly in the training activities participants from 42 different World Heritage Sites in Europe. Interpretive planning outlines have been developed for 24 or 25 of them, and 6 sites are already working to develop full-fledged interpretive plans, and I'm very happy to have 2 of them with us today. So WH-Interp created also a much wider momentum to promote values-oriented heritage interpretation and raised interest of other organizations, authorities, academia, civil society actors, practitioners and businesses, and many others. So we're now trying to see what we can do next and how we can move further from here.
So that presumably that program will continue, and it's not just the 42, but you'll presumably have some more courses running. Where do you feel this will go now? What are the next steps?
Well, what we have in mind, what we are trying to develop right now is, first of all, we are following up directly with participants in the second course to help them apply the learnings into practice and developing full-fledged interpretive plans for their sites. But in addition, we are seeking partners to develop a broader capacity development project on UNESCO-designated sites as learning landscapes, extending the scope from the World Heritage properties, which is the focus of our first 2 pilot courses, to other UNESCO-designated sites, notably Biosphere Reserves and UNESCO Global Geoparks. So resource mobilization efforts are ongoing as we speak. Exploratory consultations have been launched with several potential partners. We're trying to create the conditions for these to happen. Now, the envisaged projects and activities would initially target Europe again as a pilot region. However, its outputs and results will have a potentially global relevance and applicability, especially through the development of tools such as a manual or a massive online open course with a greater outreach. So the intention, as I was saying, is to move from an activity that was focused on incremental change to something larger that can have a transformative change for broader target audiences.
Great. Okay. And at the moment you're EU focused, but you say that it can have a more global impact, and presumably you would talk with people, with organizations such as NAI and others to maybe share some experiences with them as well.
Of course, and this is already a first step in that direction. We're now developing experience and developing data and evidence. We want to develop also new tools that can, again, have a greater outreach than a single training course with all its strengths and limits. And so as things develop, we will definitely need larger alliances and more partners to make a change in more parts of the world.
Great, thank you, Mathieu. That is fascinating. Can I move on now to Valia? And can we see you, Valia? Are you there?
Hello, everyone.
Oh, hello. Thank you. Valia, so how did you respond to this task?
Okay, first I have to confess that the initial discussions didn't start between Matteo and myself, but it was rather Thorsten Ludwig. Perhaps some of you already know him. He was the management director, sorry, of Interpret Europe at that time, and always a keen trainer, interpretive trainer. And he was the one who ran the workshops that Matteo mentioned. And he saw that we all understood that what Matteo described as needs were very, very close to what we perceived as quality heritage interpretation. And also the whole IES training program was inspired and based on the guidelines that UNESCO shared about how training should be run. So things started from there, actually.
Yes, and but you were developing an interpretive planning program anyway for Interpret Europe.
Exactly.
So what was the relationship then between those?
Exactly. As you know very well, because you were also part of that team, in Interpret Europe, we have a training program that includes 3 different certification courses. So one is for guides, the other is for writing, and the third one is for planners. What we had already was very close to what Matteo described, and we saw the opportunity to further develop that, this time especially for people working in World Heritage sites. So we tried to figure out what would need to change, perhaps, in order to attend their needs. We started from the belief that the experience of a World Heritage site should encourage people to consider how to meet today's challenges, something that Matteo also mentioned. With the word challenge, we refer to a present or future that is not sustainable, perhaps, or could be even peace-threatening. So to achieve this, we aimed into introducing interpretive planning that considers not only the outstanding universal values of a World Heritage site, but also the human values that lie at the very heart of UNESCO. And again, this has to do with using narratives and meanings instead of mere facts. Therefore, interpretation, we felt, needs to go beyond facts, right? And we had to show this somehow within our training program and this particular course. We felt that interpretation needs to explain what lies beyond the historic, cultural, or ecological significance of a heritage site. But when we say beyond, where does this beyond lead us, right? So in our view, it leads to 2 different things. The first thing is it leads to people who are mindful towards heritage, but not only, when I say heritage, not only one specific monument or a few phenomena of one specific site, but also mindful towards heritage of other cultures. And second, it leads to interpreters who help people discover the meaning heritage has for themselves as individuals and as citizens who shape one common future. Well, this may sound easier in theory than it is in practice, because World Heritage sites are very popular sometimes, so interpreters sometimes need to deal with sites that are overcrowded and visitors who have a very limited amount of time to spend. So interpretive planning in World Heritage sites needs to consider practical aspects as well, right? And yet they need to find ways to promote this mindfulness that I talked about, and to offer paths to deeper meanings, as we say in Interpret Europe. Another thing that was introduced in this adapted version of the course was the whole topic of manipulation. I already explained how we encouraged interpretive planners to focus on meanings. But to do that, it means that we often select one narrative, and therefore we may use only one frame. But when we frame experiences, this can lead to manipulation. So the whole topic of manipulation was added to the course, and because we felt that site managers need to be aware about this and act responsibly towards people. Finally, it was already part of the course, but we worked even more, was to engage the local community. We tried to include a full day of the course based on this, so that the participants of the course, when they go back to their own sites, they will know the importance, but also the way on how to actively engage local people in the whole process of interpretive planning, from the very beginning to the very end. So when doing so, locals become co-creators, and their perspectives, their values, their stories have and find their way into the final interpretive services.
And in fact, the perspectives of local people can sometimes be very different from those of the experts, and that's really important.
Absolutely, and sometimes this is lost, and it's a great pity when it is lost.
Yes, and those perspectives, when you were talking about manipulation, those perspectives can have an impact on those things, on how you present a place.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Now, Matteo mentioned earlier about the guidelines, the approaches that UNESCO takes, and in particular the education for sustainable development and the global citizenship education. Can I ask you then how Interpret Europe's approach followed these guidelines, particularly for the interpretive planning?
Okay, I have to admit this was easy because we already use these same guidelines in all our courses. So we really try to have to let these guidelines penetrate within our whole training program. And also when we train trainers and we certify trainers to run Interpret Europe courses, we make sure that they also follow these guidelines. So for example, every course, and especially this one, is based on experiential learning. So participants are asked to collaborate and find interpretive solutions to real problems that natural and cultural heritage is facing today on-site. More specifically, when talking about this course, it has been developed with these principles in mind. So course participants have 5 days to work in groups and develop their own interpretive proposals for a specific heritage site. To do this, the trainers need to create a situation that is identical as much as possible to a real one. So it is the course is run in a venue that are inside a heritage site or within an easy reaching limit of the other site. Participants need to use these 5 days to develop one interpretive proposal, so not a full plan, but something very close to it. And the similarity with the real world doesn't stop here, because participants need to get very familiar with the phenomena on the site, facilitate meetings with local stakeholders, do research, run surveys on site, etc., etc. So in 5 days, they have to do a mini version of what a real interpretive planner does. The problem they need to solve is what would be the best interpretive proposal for this specific site. And to solve this problem, they are asked to engage with the local community, explore different resources whilst actively listening and respecting different ideas, And at the same time, they need to assess what to keep and what let go. And they also have multiple opportunities for peer and self-evaluation. They need to sharpen their observational skills and their critical thinking. So all the things that I just mentioned are part of the guidelines that UNESCO gives. The final outcome and interpretive proposal for the site needs to include solutions that are resilient in the future as well. From another point of view, this course, as all other IE courses, promotes the idea that heritage interpretation needs to offer a solution and promote, sorry, I'm using the same word again, universal values such as democracy, tolerance, link between the local and the global, etc. Fantastic.
Now, if we could just talk about stewardship, and you mentioned this as a really important part of this. I tend to think of it also as being, changing people, encouraging people to take on not just an engagement with a site, but also a kind of sense of responsibility. Now, the interpretation can be focused at all heritage towards that sense of stewardship for those sites, but also for the planet as a whole. And I'm just wondering how you feel interpretation, that the heritage interpretation profession can do that.
Okay. I have this phrase I like very much. I often say that thanks to heritage interpretation, people learn not just about our heritage, but also learn from our heritage. So every aspect of nature and culture can be an opportunity to discuss about difficult issues that are so important in our days. So like sustainability, or respect towards the difference, or human rights. And I very consciously use the word discuss and not talk to. So interpreters are there to discuss with the participants. So we also use the word participants and not just visitors.
I like the word also conversation. You have a conversation.
Exactly. Heritage interpretation in all its forms can help people think for themselves, right? Develop their own understanding and connect with the heritage. So instead of me as an interpreter telling you, Peter, who just arrived on my side, what you ought to understand or what you ought to know or feel, it will be much better if I give you the scene and you just get the responsibility to get all these things for yourself. So that will be a much better way for you to actively respect and protect the site. So actually, the phrase to foster stewardship for all heritage is one of the 4 qualities that Interpret Europe promotes for heritage interpretation. And the key word in this phrase is all. It means that when we visit one site, any site that is, we can find inspiration that will help us connect with all sites. For example, if I visit a national park that is famous for gigantic oak trees, by the end of my visit, I could lose my strictly anthropocentric view and ideally feel interconnected part of a magnificent system, right? Nature. In practice, interpreters can help us develop this connection. I truly believe that, because we can select which stories we will share, promote dialogue, as you said, conversation among the visitors, encourage local communities to participate in the presentation and protection of their heritage. I can use, to close my answer, I can use an example. Coming from Greece, I will use the World Heritage Site of Acropolis. So if you ever come to Acropolis, and I will be happy to be your interpreter there, I could spend hours talking about when this was built, what are the materials that these people used, the names of the architects who built it, or we could talk about the fact that this temple, because Acropolis was the temple of ancient Greeks, was dedicated not to the most powerful of all the gods, but to the goddess of wisdom. We could discuss about the harmony of the place, and I could even ask you a question. If Acropolis was to be destroyed tomorrow, what would we build in its place? What temple offered to which god? And what would be the value behind that? So I could start a conversation about that, and maybe then you would be more intrigued to think for yourself how this heritage connects with our lives today.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Balia. That's really interesting. There are some questions here, which we'll come back to a little bit later. Can I now move on to Daphne, please? And Daphne is in Malta.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Now, I would like to ask you a little bit about the site you're working on, Giantia, and can you briefly tell us a little bit about it and how the training in interpretation has helped you?
So, Peter, I would love to quickly share a few visuals of the site, please, as it would really help to support what I'll be trying to explain.
Yeah, great.
Is it showing on the screen, Peter?
Yes, yeah, we can see that.
Perfect. So this is an aerial view of my site, Gigantia, which is a Neolithic monument dating roughly to 3600 BC. As you can see, it consists of 2 units or temple, as they are commonly referred to, and they each have their own entrance. And the entire structure is held together by a common megalithic outer wall. It is located in a small village in Gozo, which is the smallest of the 2 inhabited islands on the Maltese archipelago. As you can see from the next photo, it was built on a high plateau from where it commands panoramic views of the surrounding landscape. It is not an isolated archaeological site. On the contrary, it is located right at the center of a remarkably concentrated network of prehistoric sites, which they would have been both visually and possibly even physically connected. And this tells us that in the Neolithic, this area was an important hub of activity. Gigantia is the best preserved of all these sites, and due to its monumentality, its complexity, and even the considerable technical skill required in its construction, it was in 1980 inscribed on the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Some years later, the inscription was extended. It was extended to include 5 other Neolithic megalithic monuments in Malta. That together they showcase the same complex architectural tradition, which is unique to the Maltese islands. So you have asked me about how the training has changed my approach to interpretation, right, Peter?
Yeah.
So yeah, I can stop sharing the screen now, I believe. So I have last year participated in the course for interpretive planning with Interpret Europe, and it has proved to be fundamental for my work and for the way I think about the role that interpretation has in our sites and what it is meant to serve for our visitors and audiences. So yeah, it is safe to say that a lot has changed now in my approach to interpretation. But I think fundamentally, and this is tying up a lot to what Valia has just mentioned. Fundamentally, the biggest switch was that of instead of making it all about the transmission of information about my sites and our archaeological collection, my focus now is on trying to give visitors an experience that is meaningful, and ideally a memory or even a feeling, something that they will take home with them and that will last long after they've left our sites.
Because it's very tempting, isn't it, just to give a lot of facts, as Valia was saying, you know, that it was built here, it was built at this time, and this is the people who lived here, etc., etc. And whereas what you're saying, you wanted a different approach, more about feelings.
Exactly. Yeah. We have an academic background, so we spend years researching the sites. So it's by default, it's sort of you want to explain everything that you know about the site. But in reality, this training has taught us that you really have to simplify it, and you have to boil it down to something that is meaningful and that everyone can actually connect with.
Great. Okay. What do you feel has been your biggest challenge in doing this, the interpretive planning?
Yeah, so following my training this year, I have officially started the process of putting together an interpretation plan for Gigantea, which I will then present to senior management and hopefully then work towards its implementation. It's still a work in progress, and it's an interesting and exciting process because it is continuously challenging me to question what I thought I knew, or at least the way that for years I have been accustomed to perceive and look at my site. So in a way, this training has enabled me to look at this prehistoric monument and the artifacts that are related to it with completely fresh and new perspective in a way. So to answer your question, I think that the biggest challenge I found so far is to foster a genuine sense of cooperation and involvement between stakeholders that are directly or indirectly affected by the site, but also more significantly, the local communities. Luckily, this concept of participation, especially from locals, is now on our agenda. It is an objective that is slowly emerging at my workplace, which is Heritage Malta, is the National Agency for the Management of Sites and Museums. So in a way, it feels good that the work that I am doing doesn't only fulfill the ambition of my interpretive plan, but also it is like my small contribution towards a national drive to make people feel more included and more responsible towards their heritage. However, having said all that, the process is fairly challenging because people are not used to us inviting them to dialogue about the way heritage should be presented. Somehow there isn't that mentality that their contribution is valid, whatever their inputs or their views might be. They're not used to having a voice in this kind of planning process. So I'd like...
They were surprised that they asked you. They were surprised that they asked you.
Extremely, extremely. But I'd like to think that in the long run, if the local communities feel that they had a part in the realization of this project, it will effectively instill a sense of ownership and stewardship towards their common heritage, which would hopefully then encourage them to be more mindful and protective of the sites and its physical context.
Yeah, great. Okay. Can I ask you then about your values and what particularly are the values that you focused? You've got the outstanding universal values and others.
Well, yeah, so for decades, the focus of archaeological research when it came to the megalithic sites of Malta, including Giantia, was the architectural accomplishment which they represent, so much so that we are used to referring to the early inhabitants of Malta simply as the temple builders. But in reality, it's like we were focusing on the technical aspects of their accomplishment without really taking stock and truly try to understand how they managed it in the first place. So recently there has been a shift, and the research is now more focused on the human element, specifically how these communities that inhabited our islands thousands of years ago managed to thrive for such a long period of time in a fragile island environment with very limited natural resources. And above all, they managed to establish a remarkable cultural identity that they've expressed in creative and sophisticated ways, such as the construction of unique monuments like Giantia.
People, as we often say, people are more interested in people than they are in buildings and sites and things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. Daphne, thank you very much. We'll move on now to Yoli from Albania. Yoli, are you there? Yes, you are.
Yes, Peter.
Hi. Now, you work for the National Institute of Cultural Heritage. What can we ask you? What is your role, and what is your task now after the UNESCO training?
Yes, it is true. I work for the National Institute of Cultural Heritage in Albania. It is the main institution that is responsible for the protection of the cultural heritage, the built cultural heritage in our country. So in these terms is the focal point to address when managing cultural heritage and cultural sites and UNESCO sites. I work there for a decade now, and my main expertise actually is built heritage and historic centers. So in my surprise, actually, participating at the UNESCO training about World Heritage interpretation was a very good possibility and experience, because actually the case study was a historic center. So in my surprise, all I could learn there, and gratefully for the experience and all the expertise of the trainers, I can easily apply to my field of work, actually. So it's really a very, very good experience. Apart from that, and what it connects to the training itself, is that in this moment, the National Institute of Cultural Heritage is writing the integrated management plan for a UNESCO site, that is Berat and Gjirokastra. So I am part of the group who are writing this integrated management plan. And as you can think, the experience got from the training is closely connected to this process, actually. And it can help a lot in order to make this integrated management plan practicable and achievable to a greater, let's say, audience, to the institutions, to the local governments, to the communities, to the owners, to the tourists, and vice versa. So in this sense, at this moment, I am fully committed, actually, after the training course, to fulfill my engagement to provide an interpretive plan for the site of Gjirokastra, because I strongly believe that if I fulfill this commitment, it can be a very good annex of the integrated management plan that can be used by all active actors provide a better understanding for the site, rediscover the values, rediscover in the sense that re-emerge the values, their authenticity, be able to protect the architectural values, the tradition, and the reasons why these sites are so long-lived and still are lived today, in order for them to be, let's say, developed in a sustainable way. So yes, the course was very useful, and now my role is to provide this annex in terms of completing this interpretive plan. Thank you to the training we got in with Interpretive Europe.
Great, and interpretation, in fact, is really a critical part of managing a site.
Yes.
In many ways, yeah. Okay, you are an architect, I understand.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And can I ask you then, what is the role of architects in your country when it comes to planning at heritage sites?
Well, I am an architect actually, and since my years of student, I have had this attraction for traditional architecture that is still following me today and has defined my my career in that sense. The role, I strongly believe actually that the role of architects is designing and building, but apart from that, we have to be considered as missionaries and social activists. We are writers and painters of the city. Actually, we define we define its panorama, its landscape, and I like to joke actually when we use this term of we are the doctors who heal its wound. We have this opportunity to do so, to do good, let's say, in the built urban fabric of our cities. And when we build in a historic center, it is very crucial that we have deep knowledge of the site, of its layers, of its history, of its traditional way of building of our ancestors, let's say. Because from that moment, we go towards the future. And in order to provide, let's say, this coexistence between old and new, it is very crucial that this transition part, because we cannot, let's say, neglect transformation, but we have to know in order to be able to intervene in our cities in a sustainable way, to protect our past, to be able to enhance its values, and to go towards the future. And in this term, being an architect and working where I work, I am aware of the fact that in our historic cities, in the last decades, not always the architects have done their best.
Yeah.
So now we are in a moment that the legislation of cultural heritage has improved and has enabled, let's say, architects in a private sector to collaborate more with the cultural experts. Yes. And this has made possible that by collaborating, by working together, by setting in place specific procedures in how to intervene in our cities, has starting to give good and positive examples on how to work. It's hard sometimes, but we are getting there.
Yeah, great. Okay, Yoli, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. We've just got a few minutes left for some questions that people have been asking. I've got one here from Nigel Mills in the UK, and it's about and this maybe is for Matteo or others. That World Heritage Sites often don't make reference to UNESCO's core objectives of promoting peace and sustainable development. Is Interpretive Planning course being supported by wider guidance on how these core UNESCO objectives should be part of management planning for World Heritage Sites?
I can take this one, Peter.
Yeah. Briefly, if you don't mind.
It is very much true, yes. And this is one of the reasons why we have thought of developing this course in the first place, is to start developing an answer to this question, which is a very pertinent one. Now, the pilot course needs to be supported by other resources that can offer indeed a wider guidance on how these objectives should be part of core management planning, not only for World Heritage Sites, but again, our view is to actually have an even more ambitious vision and to think in terms of UNESCO-designated sites, because in the end, and I want to stress it once again, despite their own specificities, they all share the same core and basic objective to contribute to UNESCO's mission and mandate and to the implementation of UNESCO's program, which is aligned with these values of sustainability, the values of the Agenda 2030, the values of fostering peace, dialogue, and inclusion as in the spirit and in the very essence of UNESCO. So this is what we are trying to achieve now. The World Heritage System is a complex system. Decisions are taken by governing bodies that are composed of the state parties. So far, there has been no specific mandate or request to the Secretariat to develop dedicated initiative on heritage interpretation, but that doesn't mean that we can't work on it, because in fact, heritage interpretation can surely contribute to some of the specific objectives that are already recognized for the future of the convention. I have mentioned communication, I have mentioned communities, but I would mention the first duty of the state parties to the convention, which is to adopt a general policy that can give heritage a function in the life of the communities. And to give heritage a function, we must learn on how to best interpret heritage. And to go back to the outstanding universal value, that is per se an act of heritage interpretation, because when you decide the values of a place, you are interpreting the values of those places. So we want to make it clear that there is much more than meets the eye. There is much more than the specific outstanding universal value of a site that remains the fundamental principle and the reason why a site is inscribed on the list, but is not all that is there to know about a site.
Yes, interesting. Okay, thank you, Matteo. There's another question here from Sam Scriven. Did you encounter hostility to the World Heritage Site designation itself in any of your work? Maybe the two participants, Daphne or Yoli, did you feel this?
Hi, maybe I can start a bit. We have
very briefly, Daphne.
Yeah,
sorry.
We have only just started the process, but what we found initially was a sense of confusion in a way, because there is unfortunately a general sense of detachment in a way that people are used to being spectators of heritage rather than participants. So it's like we had to go back to basics and explain what we are trying to do. And in some instances, even explain the significance of World Heritage values and what it means to have a site, which is not just important locally, but it has universal significance. So really, it's a learning curve to get people engaged and on board. But I'm finding the process to be quite satisfactory. Sort of, it's a learning curve for us as well, while we are doing this.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comment from you, Yoli?
Yeah, I would just like to add that I believe that the secret is to find the connection point between institution and communities. If we find that small thing that triggers that both parts go in the same way, I think that we can achieve everything. So it can be a small thing, but I think it's very hard to find, and it's crucial in the process. But it can be achieved.
That's great. That's a really good summing up, I think, of that. We are now 1 minute over time, and I think what I would like to say now is a huge thank you to our panelists. For me this afternoon, for yourselves, whatever time of day it is, thank you also to the Global Association for hosting this. And thank you for participants for joining in. I believe we had quite a lot today, and a lot will be looking at this on the recording. The next webinar in the Global Association series is on the 1st of June, and that's featuring Interpretation Canada. So for everybody, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you,
Thank you.
Peter.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Peter.